Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
And this is Ashley Miller.
And we are the Inglorious Treksperts.
Go behind the scenes of all your favorite Star Trek series, from the original series to today, with the stars, writers, producers, and more, every Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
And for more, subscribe at trekspertsplus.com.
It's the logical thing to do.
Keep on trekking. Ingloriously, of course. Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
This is DAREN DOCHTERMAN, and we are the Inglorious Treksperts.
I thought it was a classic femme fatale. So much fun.
Like that Shakespearean lace in your acting.
I said, Gene, what do you want from this character?
I want you to just take the character and make it your own.
I had a good time on the film.
On day one, the movie was already $15 million over budget.
We started this movie without an ending. That's like painting yourself into a corner.
I don't think we've ever had a Star Trek captain on our show.
Being, as you said, number one on the call sheet, it is a producer's position if you're going to take it seriously. I was so glad they didn't cast me as Lorca.
You famously wrote that script in 12 days.
On one level, I wrote the script, and on another level, the story was written by everybody and his brother.
Well, I was going to say, what was your response when you were directing and Terry, sort of called you aside and said, hey, I want you to get back in front of the camera again?
I said, he sort of chummed the water a little bit. Are you ready to play Riker? What I thought he was saying was, you better go to the gym and lose some weight. Lines. Are you going to trim your beard? Don't cut your hair. My interest was totally piqued. It's not hyperbole to say it's the best Riker material I've ever had.
New episodes available every Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Or subscribe today at TrekspertsPlus.com.
But keep on trekking. Ingloriously, of course.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
And this is Ashley Miller.
And we are the Inglorious
Trekspert.
And welcome to Ralph Senensky Revisited, as we once again have a chance this time to sit down in person with the legendary Ralph Senensky. And it was such a thrill for all of us to have a chance to meet him in person, tell him how much he meant to us, and to share his words of wisdom with his many, many fans. It was a special time in GalaxyCon San Jose back in August when we were able to share the stage with the legendary Ralph Senensky.
And share the fantasy. No, that's something else.
What commercial was that? What commercial? What was share? Oh no, was that Looker? Share the fantasy.
No. Share the fantasy was the Ridley Scott commercial for, was it Chanel or?
Oh, maybe it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Share the fantasy.
Oh, I know. I was quite disappointed that I didn't actually get to meet him.
Yeah, you were doing prep.
Yeah, I was getting ready for the big show for Shatner's commentary. It's very sad that, but I mean, it was still an amazing day.
Yeah,
and it's amazing.
The great thing is he's still, with it. And though his hearing is a little bad on one side, he remembers everything. And it was quite a thing to talk with him and ask him about what happened, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, I think it's interesting because we really marvel, as people know, at Bill Shatner in '93, just how much younger he feels and how he he acts and how much he remembers. And the thing about Ralph is his mind, he's so with it. I mean, physically at 103, he's seen better days.
He's not 103. He's 101.
101, excuse me, 101. And
he's a spring chicken.
I added a few candles to his birthday cake. He's so remarkable that he remembers this. He's so quick-witted and just has a really amazing sense of the past. He has a very popular blog, Ralph's Cinema Trek, where he talks about his experience. And for those of you who want a deeper dive into Ralph's other work, we did a great episode called, I think, Wreck-It Ralph a couple of seasons ago, where we talked to him about his work on like the Paper Chase TV series and on the Casablanca TV series and a little bit about the Waltons, I think. And it was a really great conversation. We really didn't talk much about Star Trek. And what's great about this conversation we're going to have now with Ralph is it's only focused on Star Trek.
It's all Star Trek all the time.
It was very interesting because, as those of you who are listeners know, our plan had been, we curated 4 days of Star Trek content in Vegas. And we thought, oh my gosh, what would be better than to have Ralph Senensky, the only living director from the original series, in Vegas. Now, of course, when I reached out to Ralph, it was too far for him to make the trek. It was not going to be feasible for him to come to Vegas. But knowing he lives in Northern California, when San Jose fell into place, the three of us powwowed with Mike Broder, the CEO of GalaxyCon, and said, look, we think we can reach out to Ralph about coming to the convention. Is this something you would be interested in? And Mike, who's as big a fan as we are, was like, oh my God, do you think he'd be interested? Because we'll do whatever it takes to get Ralph down to the convention. We'll roll out the red carpet and, whatever it takes. So we reached out to Ralph and he said, I've never been to a Star Trek convention before, which was stunning that he had never been to a Star Trek convention. So he said, I would love to have the opportunity to go. And, there was some logistics involved because it's not easy for him to travel and to, great distances. But it all worked out thanks to the largesse of his family and friends who really knew how important this was to Ralph and made it happen. And, as we talked about, what was so phenomenal was when Ralph got there, one of the things we really wanted to see happen, and Mike really wanted to see happen, was to reunite Ralph with William Shatner, who he hadn't seen since the day he was fired on the Tholian Web. Yeah. Right? That was the last time he saw him. So we managed to arrange a reunited. It felt so good in the green room, but we didn't know. They say with a lawyer, never ask a question you don't know the answer. And I think we didn't really know how Bill was going to respond. I mean, it's a long time ago, right? Bill was so happy to see Ralph. Yeah. He kneeled down, he took him by the hand. It was just like, he how are you? And he was so delighted. And the two of them just were so happy to see each other, had a lovely conversation. Everyone sort of came and surrounded them. It was like this step into the light. We were all like drawn to this amazing thing that was happening between Bill and Ralph. And then, and then Bill was off, right? And he had to go. He had to be somewhere else.
He had to blow you to bits.
and so that was all good. And then, we said to Terry Farrell, who's a huge original Star Trek fan, do you want to meet Ralph? And she was like, oh my God, yes. And so she started talking to her, and they had a lovely conversation for like 10 or 15 minutes. She was so excited to spend time. And then it was kind of like, do you want to go out on the floor? You said you wanted to see what a convention is like. And it was like, you know what? This is an analogy I think you guys are going to agree with. It's like when Peter Ustinov comes out at the end of Logan's Run, after the Dome City has been destroyed, and all these people see the old man, Peter Ustinov, and start to approach him very tentatively but excitedly and want to reach out. It's like, oh my God, it's this, this connection to the past. Oh my God, Peter Ustinov. because he didn't have a name. So I'm going to call him Peter.
The only difference was there was no smell of cat urine.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about in Washington D.C. I'm like literally, when he comes to the Dome City at the end, and they're all coming out, all these people looking in their little mini skirts and their little weird outfits. They're like they were in the episode Justice.
But if you
or
don't
something.
think Peter Ustinov smelled like cat urine in that scene, you're joking yourself.
No, I don't think he smelled like cat urine. I think he smelled like Dove, Irish Spring. I think he smelled like Irish Spring soap. And
two deodorants.
I think he smelled like the dreams of a generation.
And so that was great. And that was like when we said, oh, Dave Blass was right there. We said, Dave, do you want to meet Ralph? And of course, Dave was so thrilled to meet Ralph because he's another one who just loves, is connected to the past of Star Trek. Truly loves Star Trek. And so it was really, and it just people started coming over and they were so excited to have the chance to meet Ralph. And then of course we went and we did our panel with him, and it was just really, really special. And this was nice because when we talked about San Jose on our episode, this was interesting. Judy Norton from the Waltons, one of the stars of the Waltons, wrote to us and said, I was so particularly moved to hear the wonderful things you had to say about director Ralph Senensky. It sounds like the Waltons is not on your hit list, but as an original member of the Walton cast and part of the family, I had the pleasure to work with Ralph on over a dozen episodes, including one for which legend Balula Bondi won an Emmy. I've also had the pleasure of him joining me on my YouTube channel about the Waltons. We've spoken about Star Trek and the iconic episodes he directed, along with behind-the-scenes info on the filming of them. He truly has a remarkable memory of all the shows and series he has directed over the years. Thank you for paying such a beautiful tribute to this living legend. And then she said, by the way, we also had the pleasure of working with Jonathan Frakes on our show for a couple of episodes early in his pre-Star Trek career.
Oh, my goodness.
And so we wrote back to Judy and thanked her for her comments and said, look, I said, at least speaking for myself, look, I who grew up in New York, who the Waltons was not my jam, right? No offense. I understand its place in television history, but I didn't watch Little House on the Prairie. I didn't watch. I was an ABC guy. I was not a CBS. CBS was for flyover states, right? I was not somebody who watched CBS. I watched ABC and occasionally NBC because I was a New York boy. I was a Brooklyn boy. Yeah. But I totally do really appreciate, and if it came off at all being snide or disrespectful of the Waltons, that was certainly not our intent, because obviously the Waltons was a hugely important show in the history of television.
Absolutely.
and a beloved show whose fandom is akin to that of even Star Trek. So,
and without it, Battle Beyond the Stars would not have been the same.
Well, that's
true. Richard
true.
Thomas, that's right.
So my connection with the Waltons goes deep, and it's because of the Ralph Waite Mego doll that can be used for Gene Roddenberry.
Yes, I love that, because I remember when you showed us your Mego Gene Roddenberry, and we were all absolutely blown away, and we're like, how did you make this? And that's when you told us that you used the Waltons.
From the Waltons.
Yeah, we should put that up on social again, because when people hear this episode, they're going to want to see that. So Judy responded to our response, and she said, I know it meant a lot to Ralph to be part of the weekend. He's going to be a guest for another series of segments on my channel. Besides the Walton stories, our fan base also loves hearing all his wonderful stories from his decades of directing. Many of them have requested more Star Trek stories, so you will be well represented in our crossover segments. It's been such a pleasure to exchange messages and keep up all the great content on Inglorious.
That's nice.
Yeah. Super nice. Super nice.
Well, and this brings up the fact that we're doing a new podcast all about the paper chase.
No, not Casablanca, the TV series.
It's called Head Full of Mush.
That's right.
Oh, I was going to say it's
actually Skull Full of Mush, but we don't want to get so close to the.
I thought it was called Soul Man, because of course David Soul played Rick Blaine in the TV series. It's Scatman Crothers, Hong Kong. Ooh, number one super guy.
My God, I loved that. I have to say about this that day, that Sunday in San Jose. Wow, that rhymes. You think about it, a lot of significant Star Trek shit happened on that day.
Indeed.
It's Senensky's first convention.
Yeah.
His reunion with Shatner. Shatner's commentary on Star Trek V is basically, other than kind of reviewing it, the first time that he'd ever done anything like that. I mean, it was a big day, man.
Yeah. It was a big day after a bunch of big days.
Yeah.
That was a special day. That was a really special day. I mean, you know, being part of connecting Ralph and Bill again, and then doing the Bill Shatner commentary on Star Trek V, and everything else that whole weekend was really special.
Yeah. But it makes my heart ache a little bit because it's this history that is slipping away. You know, it's just time takes people from us. And I think if there's nothing else that people should get out of this particular episode, I think it is probably one of the few remaining chances to hear it, you know, from a primary source, what it was like, what those experiences were, what Star Trek, you know, meant to people in the moment, and what it meant to be a part of it in the moment, and to have that kind of perspective. You're not going to get that anywhere else. This is unique.
Yeah.
It has the virtue of not having been tried.
Well, I mean, that was like for us with Vegas when we had Ande Kindred back. That was, you know, something similar. And, you know, again, it's we hear so many of these stories being repeated and transformed and elaborated and exaggerated, to have someone who was there to tell the stories. And it's so raw for him, because I'm not going to give anything away, but look, it's no secret that, you know, he was fired undeservedly from the Tholian Web because the episode was going over schedule and over budget. Again, not because of him at all. And he was the fall guy. It's still so raw for him. He's still so pissed about the whole thing. It's so interesting because we're talking
67
years, you know, since he filmed the Tholian Web, and he's still so angry. And I don't blame him because he was really hung out to dry by the production manager, and by Fred Freiberger. Yeah, you know. Yeah. So. It's really unfortunate, and but he has so many great stories, but so many terrific episodes. Before we go to the interview, I want to ask you guys: do you have a favorite Ralph Senensky episode of Casablanca? No, of Star Trek.
Absolutely, Bread and Circuses.
Of course you do.
It's one of my favorite Star Trek episodes anyway. But the fact that he was in charge of it makes it all the better. And it has so much fascinating action and humor and really great character moments in it. It's awesome.
You know, it's interesting because he's very hard on that episode. And, you know, he says, oh, the fight scenes are not great. It's like he's crazy. Ralph, if you're listening, you're crazy because that you had, you know, what was it, a 7-day schedule?
Yeah.
And that you pulled that off. You had days on location with them marching through Bronson Canyons.
Yeah.
You had all this pyrotechnics with the machine guns and everything. And then you had these giant sword fights.
Yeah.
But during the fight, they're not just about the fights, they're about character. Because there's all that stuff going on between Spock and McCoy. So you're doing these fight scenes, but they're really character scenes, but with all this action going on and all the reaction shots going on with Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
It's like, you're nuts. That is a great episode.
It's a great episode.
I mean, what you pulled off is amazing. And as people who work in the business, I'm in awe of what you accomplished on Bread Circuses. In awe. So, Ashley, what about you? What's a favorite Ralph Senensky episode for you? Because I know what mine is.
Honestly, I mean, of course, if I were Scott Mantz, I know what I would say.
But we all know what Scott Mantz would say. Metamorphosis, of course. He loves Metamorphosis. I think, you know, I think it's interesting because That's a beloved episode by Ralph, by so many people. Obviously, I'm a huge Gene Coon guy. Gene Coon wrote it, and yet it's not my favorite.
It's not.
Yeah,
it's
and
not
I
one
think
of my
it's
top 10. Yeah,
me either. And I think we have for the three of us for largely the same reasons, that it's ultimately not about our characters; it's about the guest stars.
Yeah.
And not
one
in a
of them
cool
is
Kevin Uxbridge way.
horribly dull.
Yeah,
and he did a great job. He shot on these tiny sets.
Yeah.
He fetishized the hell out of the shuttlecraft.
Right.
And and did a beautiful job directing it. Like that episode for me goes from being 2.5 stars to 3.5 stars because of the direction. And I can't say that about a lot of Star Trek episodes. Like, I've knocked Cliff Ball on Next Generation a lot. He's a journeyman director. Best of Both Worlds may be my favorite episode of Next Gen, right? It's not because of the direction, you know?
It's almost in spite of it.
And yet Cause and Effect is an episode I think is much better because Jonathan Frakes really directed it well. Like Yesterday's Enterprise, David Carson has his directorial imprimatur on it, is great. I think Metamorphosis is one of those episodes that is elevated by really good direction, which was really hard in that era to stand out because all you were worried about was time and budget, which is true now too, but you get to be more of an artist. And back then they just wanted traffic cops. Yeah. And the people who distinguished themselves were not traffic cops, they were artists. And Ralph is one of those people.
For sure. I mean, I want to say the Tholian Web, but I also feel like there's an asterisk on that choice, man, because of the history of what happened with that episode. Yeah. But as episodes go, like of the 7 that he directed, I mean, it's probably my favorite just because it has that amazing moment where, like, where Spock and McCoy get the message from Kirk saying, hey, you chuckleheads.
Honestly, that's more due to the writing, though.
Yeah, that's true.
That's more due to the writing.
That's not the directing.
I don't think the directing on that episode is altogether very good. I mean, just having a little Kirk standing there.
But we kind of know why, because they ran out of time.
They didn't have the suit.
He was replaced. Yeah. And he talks about that, so we're not going to explain why. But look, for me, if we're going to talk about great scenes directed by Ralph Senensky, obviously one of the most iconic Star Trek scenes of all time, Risk Is Our Business and Return to Tomorrow. Yeah. But my favorite, hands down, Ralph Senensky episode of Star Trek is This Side of Paradise. I mean, it has it all.
That's a great episode.
It has romance. It has action. It has amazing character drama. It's beautifully shot. It has great location work. It has great work shooting on the Enterprise. And I know, DC Fontana gets a lot of love for that, as she should, for that script. But Ralph Senensky deserves what he did. And, he talks about, having shooting Leonard on that tree branch.
Yeah.
And my God, that is
that alone.
Yeah. So great. Because, doing a Spock love story, that is very tricky, especially at that time. And that he pulls it off with not to take anything away from Dorothy, because it's a beautifully written episode, but it is brilliant, and it's brilliantly performed. The performances from everybody, from Bill, from Leonard, some would say, oh, Dee goes a little over the top with the mint julep, good old Southern boy. I actually like that all. The Jimmy Carter
and
voice.
Frank Overton has never been better.
Frank Overton's never been better. And Jill Ireland is luminous. So it's just a really great episode. And what a great teaser out when he's trying to engage Spock into getting emotional. And, he has that thing over his head and he's coming at Shatner and it's like, boom, act out. And then we come back.
It's great.
And it's so great. And
not enough.
And George Takei is great in it. I think George is really good in it. I just love that episode. Plus, I love that scene in the hallway when when Captain Kirk goes, "This is mutiny," and he goes, "Yes, it is,
sir. It is."
I love that episode. It's subtle and it's smart and it's beautifully shot. And even that, he got screwed. Jill Ireland got sick. They lost location. The location when they were in the middle of shooting. I mean, and he just rolled with the punches and did an episode that stands among Star Trek's greatest episodes.
Agreed.
So do we want to hear how he did it?
Let's hear how he did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Stick with us because we'll be back with our conversation with Ralph Senensky after these brief commercial messages. And then following our interview with Ralph, we'll be back for a few closing thoughts. Stay tuned.
Captain's log, stardate 3417.3, Omicron Ceti 3. We had expected to find no survivors.
These people shouldn't be alive.
Is it possible that they're not?
This is Layla Kalomi, our botanist.
Lieutenant, put me through to Admiral Comac in Starfleet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Captain. I can't do that.
I said get back to your station.
No, sir.
This is mutiny, mister.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Spock.
Yes, what did you want?
We're evacuating.
No, I don't think so.
You mutinous, disloyal, computerized half-breed. We'll see about you deserting my ship.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mark Altman, co-host of Inglorious Treksperts, showrunner of Pandora, producer on Librarians. And I'm so thrilled to have, when you say very special guest, they say that a lot about people, but we truly have a very special guest in Ralph Senensky, director of some of the greatest Star Trek episodes of all time. He's also directed for a lot of other amazing shows. And if you want to know more about that, he has a blog called Ralph's Cinema Trek. We also talked about it. I think the Paper Chase and Casablanca on the podcast, Inglorious Treksperts. So you'll check, if you're interested in that, check that out. But today I want to really focus on Star Trek, obviously. So, Ralph, I think the best place to start, of course, is at the beginning, which is how did you end up, your first episode, still one of the greatest. Here's DAREN document. DAREN, you're not late. We started early just because we have this incredible resource, and I didn't want to waste a minute. So come on in, come on down. DAREN document, associate producer.
DAREN. Hello. People, we've done a podcast together, but this is the first time. Was that 4 years ago?
It was a couple of years ago, yeah. But this is the first
that
time
we met in person.
It wasn't as exciting as you seeing Bill Shatner again, but okay.
Is that Ashley? No, that's not Ashley.
No. But so we were just saying, for you, you've done a lot of episodic television. Now you get offered still one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek ever produced, This Side of Paradise. How did you get involved? Did Bonnie Justman come to you, Gene Kuhn?
I think it was probably Gene Kuhn. That Gene Kuhn, the year before, had been, I think, the fifth producer of The Wild Wild West. It had been created by Garrison, but they wouldn't let him produce it. And so they had a series of producers, and I know the names of some of them, but I won't go into it. But nobody got it. And I think he was like the fifth one in line was Gene Kuhn. And Gene and I got along fine. As he told me, Wild Wild West scripts were written, they bring a writer in, create a story, he'd go home and write it, they'd bring it back, and then Gene Kuhn would sit down and rewrite it using that as a first draft, because he said they didn't get it. And then he left, he had a great reputation. And Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, the first half a year of the first season, he had produced the show, and it was a tough show to produce with a load, and he just needed some help. And they brought in Gene, and Gene, of course, was the perfect man to come into it. Gene, I figured this out. When Gene came over, he brought Joan Pevney into the company because they had known each other for a long time. And then that was about mid-season of the first season. Then almost near the end of the season, Gene, and I'm sure it was Gene who brought me over. And as a matter of fact, and I've never told this before, or mentioned this before, but the first script they sent me was The Devil in the Dark, which he had written. And I think because he was the producer, he was the one who picked the director, and I think he wanted me to direct it. But Bobby Justman wisely said that that's a tough show for somebody coming in to do his first one, so they pulled it and they gave me This Side of Paradise. Well, in the meantime, Gene had either had called my agent for me, or my agents had submitted me. I'm not sure, but I'm sure he was involved in my coming over there. And This Side of Paradise was the first one that I directed then.
Dorothy Fontana famously told the story that she said to Leonard, "Oh, Leonard, I'm writing a love story for you." And Leonard said, "You can't, I'm a Vulcan, right? There's no love story for Spock." Obviously, you directed one of the most beautiful love stories in the history of Star Trek. This love that could not be, that was never meant to be, between Leonard and Jill Ireland. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approached that and working with Leonard?
Well, the way I worked with any actor, I never came onto a show where there was a running character playing his role to tell him how to play it. I knew what the story needed, and so I would come in and stage, and I would be very careful in my preparation in staging, and stage it, and expect the actor to, do his part, and if there was something wrong, if there was something different, make the suggestion. But that was the way we worked, and it was, with Leonard, it was just a beautiful relationship, because, I staged, he loved it, we worked together beautifully, and in one instance, I don't know how many of you, and I'm sure you are familiar with the show, but one of the famous scenes in the show was Spock hanging from the limb of the tree. Well, that was not written that way. Spock had been discourteous, had not responded to Kirk's calling him, and when they finally found him, it was written they were just standing in a field. He had found him in a field. I had scouted the locations where we did the first 3 days, all of the stuff. I scouted the Disney Ranch, so I had that planned in the middle of the field as it was written. Well, Jill Ireland, and I don't know how many of you know this story, for the first 2 days at Disney Ranch, she did not have to work. She was due to start on the third day, and we got word early in the morning of the third day that she would not be coming out because they feared she had the measles. Oh, no. So we just finished everything we could do at the ranch without her, went back to the studio, finished the day there. They found out by the next day that she didn't have the measles, but they couldn't get the ranch back because it was booked. So they found Bronson Canyon, and it was gorgeous. And so when we got to it, that was about the second or third scene that we did on the 5th day, on Friday. And we were staging it as I had planned it at Disney Ranch. We were doing it standing in the middle of a field, and the scene wasn't working because Kirk is berating Spock because he has not answered him, and Spock is being sassy, and it just wasn't working. And out of the side of my eyes, I saw a limb of a tree about 50 yards away. And I asked Jerry, the wonderful Jerry Fitterman, I said, "Jerry, I don't want to shoot here. Can I move it?" He said, "Sure." So we went over there, and I said, "Let her just hang from the tree like a monkey." And he just did. He just did. beautifully, and all of a sudden he played the scene differently because he didn't have to be sassy. He could just be friendly and say, yeah, screw you. And it's an iconic scene. And that was kind of the way Leonard and I worked the whole time. At the end of the show, I had I'm going to get emotional. I had a note from Leonard thanking me.
Oh.
No, it was beautiful.
That episode does more to cement, I think, the performance and the, sort of Spock is a beloved but tragic character that he can't love. Now, of course, it's a beautiful love story, but you also had a real life beautiful love story interfering in that Charlie Bronson, who was around to keep Jill Ireland from...
I have been told that, and I never knew it until these many years later when people would tell me that. I didn't know Charles Bronson was on the set.
You mentioned, obviously, Jerry Finner, the great director of photography. And one of the challenges, obviously, of not being on set is location is that you can't control the sun as much as you may want to. So it's so wonderful that you could say to Jerry, I want to move the action over here. And rather than him be like, oh, we can't, the light isn't right, he says, of course we can. That sounds great. And then he was willing to work with you to do what was necessary.
Well, by the time we did that scene, the second scene we did, first scene we did was Spock and Layla in the garden. The second scene was the scene where she leads him to the spore plant, and he gets sprayed. And after we did that scene, and this was our 5th day of shooting, and Jerry and I had gotten on fine right from the beginning. But after we did that scene, Jerry did come to me and say, after that scene, he knew he wanted to work with me again. And I said, and me with you.
He was absolutely extraordinary, Jerry. And of course, you worked with him on many episodes. It wasn't until the very end that Al Francis replaced him on Tholian Web.
Right.
And it wasn't the same, was it, working with Al versus working with Jerry?
Larry was, when Jerry did, and I didn't know this at the time, but Jerry, we had the Enterprise with these dull gray walls, and Jerry just believed that color is more than color, that it's emotional, and that you use color to create emotion, to match the scene. And so he, in those early years, this was before I got there, but I've read about this, that so he was painting the walls with color, which when I did it, work with him, I thought it was beautiful. Well, I found out that NBC didn't like it. They said, no, it should be gray walls. And the decision then came up to Roddenberry, and Roddenberry stayed with Jerry and said, no, we're going to do it his way. And so that when Al Francis, going into the 3rd season, Al Francis did continue, but it was his first show. The schedule was horrendous, and quite frankly, Al Francis was a good cameraman, but he wasn't Jerry. Jerry was special. Jerry Finnerman was an absolutely special, brilliant cameraman. And that doesn't come easy.
Yeah.
How much input did you have?
How much input did you have
to the casting on the episode?
To the casting on the guest roles?
On that one, well, Frank Overton, I had already directed Frank in 4 shows on 12 O'Clock High, and when Jodie Augustus suggested Jill Ireland, I had not worked with her, but I knew her, and I said yes, and she was lovely. And I got to work with Jill, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 6, 8 years later, maybe even more than that. We did a night gallery later. a lovely actress and just a lovely gal. But I did not know Charles Bronson was on the set.
You wouldn't have come out of your trailer.
Huh?
You wouldn't have come out of your trailer.
Who had a trailer? No.
I specifically
You
asked.
found on location, you found the closest bush?
I specifically asked about casting. I specifically asked about casting because another episode that you did, Bread and Circuses, has perhaps one of the greatest casting of the villain and his sidekick ever on Star Trek.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, there were so many actors and director, we had a big, you'd have your big list of actors that you knew. And then, of course, when I did Star Trek, I'd only been at it for about 6 years. And Joe DiAugusta was the one who provided both Logan and
Logan Ramsey,
and Bill Smithers, and I provided Bill Bradley. I asked for him. No, but they were great, just great.
That's one of my favorite episodes because it is so subtle. The humor in it can go right past you if you're not paying attention.
Yes.
Darren's saying it's one of his favorite episodes.
That's right. For example, when Kirk comes back after his meeting with the pro-counsel and Drusilla, the girl, they ask, "What happened to you, Captain?" He says, "Well, they threw me a few curves." That is hilarious, and it goes right past most people, which I think is great.
And I will guarantee you, Gene Kuhn wrote that line.
Because that was a Roddenberry and Gene Kuhn collaborators when Gene Kuhn was on his way out the door. But I got to ask you about that episode because I know you've been very critical of yourself in the past for the way that the fights were staged because you had less time. Again, I think you're the only one who feels that way because it's a beloved episode, and what it has to say about the medium of television is as relevant today as ever. It's such a great satire. I mean, before Patty Chayefsky did Network, you did this and were saying they'll do anything for ratings, which is more true today than ever.
Yeah, well, no, that's true. My criticism, and obviously I didn't know enough at that time. It was only my third show. And incidentally, when I say it was my third show, that was not my third show in a row. When I did This Side of Paradise, it was 3 months before I did Metamorphosis. And in between, I did a Mission Impossible. Then from Metamorphosis to Bread and Circuses, it was another 3 months. But I think that in the arena scene, there's a bit where Logan Ramsey, where Nero is, questioning Kirk and trying to, impose and make him feel, and trying to intimidate him. And Kirk, and actually, the scene should be. It takes away from the trio drama, which is Kirk watching his two closest friends down there trying to kill each other, and his attention should be there, and it's not about Kirk. It's about Kirk's fear for his people. And I just think that the focus of the scene is off. And there again, this is not an accusation, but that would have been a scene that Gene Roddenberry wrote. And Gene Roddenberry was great, but he didn't have Gene Kuhn's sensitivity.
Yeah. And speaking of Gene Kuhn's sensitivity, you mentioned Metamorphosis, which is a beloved episode. The opposite of This Side of Paradise, where you were doing all this location work, you were on the stages, and in fact, you were on the swing set, which was very small, and you had a shuttlecraft.
It was a little larger than this room.
And that was tough because you had the shuttlecraft, the Zephram Cochrane's dwelling, and you didn't have a huge stage to shoot it on. It was the opposite of being on location.
And Jerry Finnerman, that was our second show together. And Jerry, first thing he came to me with was, he said, I think we should use the fisheye lens. And by then I was kind of learning the lenses, but I didn't know what the fisheye was, and it was the 9mm. And it's a very wide angle lens. And it's what gave, camera would be, the first shot you see is the camera and the spaceship. And they might have been about 7 paces apart. With the fisheye lens, it looked like it was a football field apart. And it was just so innovative. And then Jerry also came to me and said he'd like to do a purple sky. And I said, fine. Well, I should have said more than fine. It was inspirational. Jerry again, I just say Jerry Finnerman is not given all of the credit he should have for the look of that original series.
Were you involved in the casting of Glenn Corbett and Eleanor Donahue as the guest stars in that episode?
I was involved. Well, I don't know that I selected Glenn, but Joe D'Augusta suggested him, and I directed Glenn, so I said, sure. And when it came to Eleanor Donahue again, I'd not worked with her, but I knew the reputation. I said, fine.
Can you talk about, I think one of the most beautiful shots in that episode is holding up the scarf and seeing the companion, that beautiful POV shot that you do. Can you talk about that shot and sort of what led to it and your approach to shooting this, again, another love story?
Well, let me take it even further back, because that episode was a perfect example of collaboration. The companion, which was this sparkling figure, the sparkling gaseous thing in yellow with red and blue and spot dots. I think, and this is just my opinion from later years looking back and knowing how those things work, the opening scene in the spacecraft where they see the companion for the first time, and Jerry Finnerman created this effect with light, flickering lights of green, yellow, red, blue. And I think that Edmondson, who created the companion, I think that's how he created it. I know that he has said that he didn't know what to do, but what he did, he took a piece of yellow paper, put red, green, blue things on it, and then waved it in front of a camera, which was kind of trying to create the effect that that Jerry had created in the spacecraft. But by the same token, wardrobe, they worked independently, and they had this green and purple costume for Eleanor with the scarf. And when we got to the final scene, when he's going to be telling her that he's leaving and he's going to take her with him, and she's going to tell him that she can't go. And I didn't want to start the scene with them just talking. And I figured that since Eleanor at this point she's no longer just the lady she was, but she is the companion. And I wanted the companion to keep emphasizing that she was different, and so I had her hold up the scarf just to look at a scarf. She had never seen a scarf before, this cloud. Well, somebody very wisely, when they got to post-production, and of course, God forbid they should have the director involved at that time. And when they worked on it, whoever it was, and I think it was probably Eddie Milkus, when we did the point of view, and I did shoot a point of view of her looking at the scarf, but that shot also had the scarf, but we could see Glenn Corbett behind it talking. but it was green and purple and in those colors, and they turned that in the computer, they turned it into yellow to match the companion before. So it's the companion looking at him as she's used to seeing, and it's one of those. I didn't, it came about, but it's a brilliant ending, and I'm very proud of it, even though many of us are involved in making it.
Film, TV and film are collaborative art.
Yes, and film is a collaborative art.
I want to ask you, because that is certainly an iconic moment in Star Trek. There's another moment that has made its way to the top 10, like most remembered, most beloved moments. And of course, that's in Return to Tomorrow, Shatner's "Risk is Our Business" speech. I wonder what you can tell us about filming in the briefing room and shooting that, and Bill's approach, because that sort of epitomizes what Star Trek's all about, doesn't it? Risk is our business.
Yes. Well, that's the whole of Return to Tomorrow, which bothered me because there were such script problems. And I found out since in reading the Cushman book that Gene Kuhn was involved. I mean, they were creating that script back when Gene Kuhn was still the producer. And there was a long memo that he wrote to Gene Roddenberry that he was having trouble with the writer. And he just said, he's impossible. I mean, I can't work with him. Well, then by that point, there was a little tension between the two Genes. By then, Gene had left, and Roddenberry just took over and rewrote the script. And I've told this, that the first script that I got, the title page said, "Return to Tomorrow" by Gene Roddenberry. Well, the original writer took exception and took it to the Guild, and they ended up that there was a shared credit. When it came to the "Risk is Our Business," it's a great speech, and again, I staged it, and I do remember that was a 10-page day, and we were really under the gun by then. That was the third show I had done after Paramount had taken charge, when they had cut literally a half a day shooting out of the schedule. They didn't take, they cut each 12 minutes out of each day, which added up to a half a day, so that the 6-day show was spanning 6 days, but you had, in terms of hours, 5.5 days. And you just had time to, again, do what I said before. You stage it, you go in, and you just tell the actor if there's something to adjust. And on that speech, it was a day where there wasn't time to do it again. But also, I knew that it worked. But Bill was selling it. And my interpretation was, I didn't want him to be selling it. I wanted him to be talking about it because of his own passion. And that the reaction to it from Diana Muldaur, from Jim Doohan, from the other 4 people, from Duncan Spock, they're reacting in a quiet way as if he had done it that way. But I just think that if Bill if we had had the time for Bill to do that speech the way he did the speech with the companion, the Metamorphosis, I mean, it's great now. I just think it would be even better the other way. But that's just my opinion.
I mean, that's not something you can afford to do a lot of takes on, given your schedule, either.
Well, the other thing I remember about that was one of those, that was a long speech. And I don't think he did it all in one take. We did several takes, and I remember being just a little annoyed because I thought, I'm not going to not going to make my day's work if we can't just get it now rather than a little later. But we got the day's work done. And that show was shot in the 6 day span, 5.5 days without any overtime. So it's literally 5.5 days in terms of hours.
That's crazy. Wow, it's absolutely nuts. And this is on film with one camera in the old days. I got to ask you, because it's not always about the work, sometimes politics get in the way, and that was famously the case on Is There in Truth No Beauty with the IDIC, where Gene Roddenberry wanted to sell IDIC trinkets and tried to write the show, and got a lot of pushback. But that created challenges for you.
Well, he wanted that in. He wanted that scene, and he had wanted it in. I think Spock's Brain was the show that shot just before. Whatever the show that shot the week before we shot Is There in Truth, he had put it in there, or was going to put it in there, and they didn't have time. And so when it came, he put it into the next show, and he put it in on the weekend. And it was my understanding that Leonard called the producer Fred Freiberger on the weekend complaining because he felt that, and it was in that original form, it was overwritten, and he just felt that it was commercialism and that they were concerned already about the quality, some of the quality of the scripts. And the producer said, no, it's fine. I'm busy on the next one. So then Monday morning when we came to work, Leonard had talked to Bill, and since they couldn't get the producer to do anything, Leonard called Gene Roddenberry. And Gene Roddenberry came to the set, and the company, we all sat for a half a day while Bill and Leonard and Gene Roddenberry discussed and discussed. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were discussing something. And it ended up that Roddenberry said, well, he would go home and rewrite the scene and work on it. So, but we had lost the half a day. And he did go home and he just trimmed it. And the scene as it appeared finally works. It worked fine. So he had trimmed it. But we had lost a half a day. So that show did go 7 days. Went into an extra day, which reflected later on the Tholian web. Well, we'll get to that later.
Okay, we'll wait on Tholian web then. But I do want to ask you, because you talked a lot about Gene Kuhn, who is a beloved figure in Star Trek and passed away of lung cancer in 1973. So he hasn't been lauded the way some other people have. But what can you tell us about working with John Meredith Lucas and Fred Freiberger, who were the subsequent showrunners, to use a term that really wasn't used at that time, but that's what they were. Can you tell us about working, any thoughts you have about John Meredith Lucas and later Fred Freiberger?
Well, John Meredith Lucas I knew because he had produced some episodes of Insight, Father Kaiser's Paulus production, so I knew him. And who else did you?
I met Fred Freiberger during the 3rd season.
I met Fred Freiberger at the end of my third day of shooting on the Tholian Web, which was my second show. That was when I met him, when he called me in to fire me.
Well, let's talk about that, because this was a time Paramount had taken over the studio. They bought Desilu. They cut the schedule, they cut the budget, and then you became the fall guy for cost overruns. But explain why that was, and obviously with the environmental suits and all this stuff that was beyond your control.
Well, Fred Freiberger has probably taken more blame for that than he should, because Fred Freiberger was taking orders from Doug Kramer, who was the head of production at Paramount Studio. And Well, Doug Kramer, after he gave the order for me to be fired because he had articles in the trade papers the next day about directors not obeying their schedules and used my name, and just this vocal diatribe about me. I didn't work for months, but so Freiberger did fire me, you know, as he was instructed to do, but that was it.
But weren't the delays because you got environmental suits which didn't have zippers?
Oh yes, no, we didn't go to that. And the reason that it was behind schedule, when we came into work the first day, and it was to be 4 people, Kirk, Spock, Doc, and Chekhov, on another ship like the Enterprise, but everybody is dead, and they were in silver lame spacesuits. Well, we got there and there were no spacesuits. The guys I was told the guys had been brought in on the day before on Sunday for their first fittings. When we closed shop on Friday, a production manager who was supposed to be in charge of things, and the production manager should have known there are no spacesuits, let's schedule something else to start Monday morning, but that wasn't done. So again, we lost a half a day while the guys when they were making the spacesuits, and then when they went in and for their fittings, and because they were silver lame and skin tight, you couldn't have zippers, you couldn't have snaps, they were sewn into them. Well, when we started shooting at 1 o'clock for the afternoon, the guys did have to go to the restroom. When they go to the restroom, they had to be unsewn, go to the restroom, come back and be re-sewn. And so I ended the day a half a day behind. And at the end of the 3rd day, because I had not caught up that half a day in the next 2 days, I was fired. And then I have seen the schedule and the balance of the season. There were several of the directors. Mark Daniels was gone by then. Joe Pesci was gone. I was now gone. So that I don't know who they were directing, but there were more 7-day shoots, and there was one director that went 7.5 days, but nobody got fired.
They brought in a so-called fireman to finish that. They brought in a fireman to finish that episode, whose job is just to come in on time and on budget, with no respect for the quality of the show.
Oh yeah. Well, Ed Kramer. I mean, I won't go into Doug Kramer.
Not a lot of love there. No. Okay. I do want to do this real quick because a couple of people, if you just free associate, I want to mention some people, maybe you have some memories of them. Charlie Washburn is somebody who people don't talk about. He was the AD, he was the first African-American AD, I think in the DGA too. And he was beloved by people on that set. And you know, not all ADs are beloved. I just wonder if you have any memories of him.
Oh yes, I do. Charlie Washburn, he was on that set, and later, that was in the 60s, in the 70s, about 70, 73, I was doing I'd done a Waltons, and then they kept me on board to direct a movie for television, A Dream for Christmas, which was an all-black show. And Charlie Washburn was also the assistant director on that show. And because of Charlie, he arranged so that Max Hodge, a friend of mine who was doing the rewrite of the script, and we went with Charlie to a Sunday Baptist black church because I had several scenes in a black church. In fact, the whole cast was black. I think the only white students and the only white people in it were we did a thing outside of a schoolhouse, like a high school house, and there were white students intermixed. But otherwise, as far as the main characters, it was an all-black cast. I mean, it was a big cast. And Charlie took me there, and I got to do my black service on camera.
Another legendary figure in the annals of Star Trek is production designer Matt Jeffries. Matt Jeffries, the production designer.
Yeah, well, because again, Matt, your sets were designed ahead of time. Directors just arrived on the set, and it was there. I had very little actual contact with Matt, because by the time I got there to use his set, he was busy designing next week's. So I did not have the relationship with Matt that I had with Jerry Finnerman.
The sets were brilliantly designed.
Oh.
And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about being at Desert and shooting those sets, and trying to find different ways to shoot them that maybe other directors didn't. How did you approach shooting the bridge and shooting sick bay and just bringing something new to what you were doing?
You just look for your angles. You know, if you have your scene to stage it, you look for you want to stage it so that it's dramatically right and the people interplay, but you also want it to be, you want the composition of your shots to be interesting, and you just look for it.
Before I open the questions, I got one last question I have to ask you. Here we are at a giant convention, tens of thousands of people here. We just got back from Las Vegas, tens of thousands of people celebrating Star Trek. After all these years, looking back at Star Trek and your association, what do you think it is about Star Trek that captivates people, that it endures, that it's going to be celebrating its 60th anniversary in 2 years?
Well, I think it goes back right to the beginning with Roddenberry. I don't know who the story editor was at that time. Bobby Justman, and then when they brought in Gene Kuhn, Dorothy Fontana, they just worked so hard at those scripts. But Roddenberry wanted to do a series about people, and television had a tendency to want to leave the people, and I mean, this was early on, you know, to get into the action. But he wanted to do something where you're involved with people, and he literally sold the series by calling it Wagon Train to the Stars. Because Wagon Train was like an anthology show about people as they went across the country settling it. And I think that just the way they worked, not only so that it was correct scientifically, but that the interplay between people, and they were real people and real problems, that it just worked. I think the series, that after they left, they didn't do Next Generation for almost a decade later. And by then, the networks, in their desire for action, and I know a lot about that because I did a lot of shows that required action. But they had lost, I felt, they had lost some of what started with Roddenberry and then enhanced with Kuhn, with what they did with people and the interplay and the stories. I know that Gene Kuhn told me that at that time he wanted to do a story, I think it was about Vietnam. And he wanted to do that, which of course you couldn't do, so he did it, but he did it as a Star Trek. And as a Star Trek, he could get by with it because he wasn't saying it was Vietnam. And there were just so many ways that you could take social issues, and by putting them into space and into this future time, you sort of got your message stated. But the networks couldn't complain because you'd sort of hidden it. And I have some sadness that aspect of Star Trek did fade.
And we're back, and that's one for the ages. Ralph Senensky talking about shooting the original Star Trek.
It's so great. I mean, you feel like you're almost there, because you can tell that he remembers everything, and it's really miraculous.
Remember,
and what you can't tell, listening, I mean, obviously from listening to the episode, is look, I had to come in to that panel late and sort of sit back and watch a lot of it, and that room was packed, dude.
Yeah.
People were just, you'd never, it isn't the first thing that you'd think about, right? That here's this guy that, you have to be like a dyed in the wool, like, down in the weeds, Trek nerd, like us, you would think, to be excited by that appearance. But if you just walked into that room, the energy in that room was just so intensely focused on him. And it was just, I mean, people were literally leaning forward in their seats, because I think they felt like how special the moment was, just kind of touching a piece of Star Trek history.
Don't touch. Don't
touch the history. You'll break it.
Don't touch.
No touching.
No touch eye.
Yeah, it was so special. And it was funny because, we only had a few minutes for questions. And of course, one of the guys started asking about the Waltons. And I was like, no, don't ask about the Waltons. Not now. Now's not the time. But it was great. And it was so gratifying to see so many people, because we didn't add him till pretty late. So there wasn't a ton of chances to promote it. Like, he wasn't on the website, I think, until about a week before, and the panel wasn't, schedule wasn't announced, and we had been away in in Vegas, so we didn't really have much of a chance to promote it. Before that, we were at Raleigh and Comic-Con, so I was concerned that like nobody would come, and it was packed, and that was so wonderful. And again, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to our friends at GalaxyCon for making it possible, and treating him with such reverence and warmth, and helping facilitate the Bill Shatner introduction.
Yeah,
reintroduction.
It was great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So really, really remarkable. We talk about Trek archaeology. This is it right here. This is why nobody does this better than us. If I do say
nobody
so
does
myself.
it better.
Yeah.
In fact, I wish someone would.
That's funny. But anyway, I'm so glad we could share this with you. What's really interesting, by the way, is there was a problem with the audio, that the panel did not get recorded. It got screwed up by a technical person at the convention center. But your friends at Inglorious Treksperts were recording it for our documentary. And that's why we have the audio. Because had we not had a video crew there filming, this would not have been recorded, because there was a technical problem. So
because God looks out for drunks, fools, and ships named Enterprise.
Yeah. So anyway, and look, we, Mike, as well as us, said to Ralph, we'll see you next year.
Yeah.
And Ralph poo-pooed that. He's like, not that he wouldn't want to come. He's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. But this was so amazing. Mike just looked at him again and said, even a little more forceful, we'll see you next year.
Yeah.
And I hope that we are lucky enough to get to spend more time with Ralph at GalaxyCon next year in San Jose.
Because I want the real answers this time.
Yeah. You can't handle the truth. Anyway, well, look, this is great. And thanks to everyone who joined us live and in person. Thanks for those of you who are joining us on the podcast or at YouTube. You can now watch video episodes on YouTube, and you can also watch video episodes if you're a Treksperts Plus member 1 week early on Spotify. And of course, Deck 78 is exclusively available 1 month early to all our Treksperts Plus subscribers. And if you want to share your thoughts about this episode or anything else in the Star Trek universe, you can email us at trekspertsplus@gmail.com, or engage with us on the many social channels where we are present. And we recently
join our Discord.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, join our Discord community. The link is in the show notes. Just recently, for our Discord subscribers and our Treksperts Plus subscribers, we hosted a wonderful screening of The Last Starfighter, where we talked about the 40th anniversary of that film and did live commentary to the film.
And the fact that the whole movie is because Meg Wiley is there, controlling it.
Yeah.
She is. She's controlling it. But then I started to get really angry, and the illusion was broken.
Ah.
Yeah.
Because she left my mind.
You threw yourself up against the Discord server.
I did.
And then that scene where Griggs steals the Gunstar because he has to wait. No.
You know what I love too? That Mark Alamo is in it.
Yeah.
Like you never know where Mark Alamo is going to pop up.
That Gul Dukat is tricky.
Yeah, yeah. And you got to stick around for our next episode because I did not give an Isaac Altman Star Trek Marathon update. You're going to have to come back to find out what's going on with the marathon on our next episode. So
join us, won't you?
Behalf of Ashley Edward Miller, Darren Doctorman, and myself, Mark A. Altman, what do we say? Keep on trekking, ingloriously, of course. Engage.